just about everybody here knows or certainly has heard of, our Nebraska cowman. Howard is just a tremendous individual, and Mr. Raymond has created a name for himself far and wide. He started the equipment business in '71, ended up doing a lot of different things, ended up with his cow herd, and is now pretty much retired. So helpful in doing all the things he does as far as our Collectors Club is concerned, as far as IHCC is concerned. And he now is going to tell us about the Mystery Reaper and the incredible work he's done so far. I'm going to get out of the way. Howard, please.
Thank you. It was a year ago that we were in Roanoke, and we'd gone out to the McCormick farm and saw the reapers that they have out there, and talking with Ben Trapani with Pennsylvania Chapter 17, he mentioned that he had several of these reapers that he had gotten through the trust from Melrose Park and had them at his museum there in Pennsylvania. They'd assembled one for themselves, and he needed to find a home for those to get that stuff, the surplus machines that he had. International Harvester built 400 of the 1831 Reaper replicas for the Reaper Centennial in 1931. There's one at Pioneer Village up here in Nebraska. There's one out to the Gehring Farm and Ranch Museum out in the panhandle of Nebraska. There's several around the country. All the land-grant universities got those Reaper replicas. They went to quite a few museums, and they had these few left in surplus that were stored there at Melrose Park. But what really got me interested when Ben said he had a different Reaper that he referred to as an 1859 model. And I thought, well, what is that? Is that something that one of the first Reapers that was produced in Chicago? McCormick moved his Reaper business to Chicago in 1847. He had revised, he had some new patents by then, he had improved his machine. And so I was curious to what we really did have. So I contacted Bill Swope, who's the chairman of the trust committee, as they were in charge of these Reapers. They're actually owned by the International Harvester Collectors, you and I. And so I submitted a formal request that I would receive these Reapers as is condition in these crates from Ben and take them to the Tri-State Antique Engine and Thresher Association at Bird City, Kansas. And the president of the Tri-State Antique Thresher Association is here with us today. Rod Klepper, right here is with us today. So, and we're very proud to have those Reapers at Bird City, and I'm anxious to tell you a little bit about them today. When I talked to Ben, I'd made the request, or I'd talked to Ben, I'd talked to Bill Swope and made these arrangements. The trust committee approved my request to receive these Reapers on loan in Grand Island in June up here. And so I knew that later that summer I would be able to go to PA and actually pick up the Reapers from Ben. So I had a couple other shows going on after the roundup. We had the Thresher Show the last of July. Then I had another show up here south of Hastings in August. And then immediately after that, what's going on here? Don't do that to me. immediately after that show, I took my camper over to Glenville, hooked up to my flatbed trailer, and I started east to go to pick up the reapers. I got over about to Clarinda, Iowa. This was on a Monday, and my phone rang. And it was Barry Denning, who's one of our Chapter 12 members. He works out at the combine plant. And Case IH had contacted him, and they wanted to get this F-12, which we had on display at the Roundup. We had, after the Roundup, we'd taken it out to the Case building at Husker Harvest and stored it out there. Well, they wanted it at Rantoul for the half-century of progress. I had it backed in the building, clear back in the back. I'd unloaded it in there after the Roundup. The tractor's not in running condition. They were going to come with a drop deck trailer and load it. Well, how are they going to load it? They need to get it out of the building. They don't have a winch. I says, Barry, let me call Scott. So I pulled off the highway there in Iowa. I called Scott Raish up to Racine. He answered his phone right away. I said, Scott, what's going on? What do we need? Well, he says, I tried to get a hold of a tilt bed truck to come in and winch it on so they could, but when they found out it was a steel-wheeled tractor, they have aluminum decks on those trucks. They don't want any part of it. I said, Scott, I'm going east with an empty trailer. Why don't I just turn around and go back and get it? Oh, he says, we'll make it right with you. Keep track of your expenses. We'll make it right. And they did. They were very, very generous to me. So I turned around. I went back to Grand Island. I got it loaded that evening about 5 o'clock. It was, if you remember this summer, if any of you were in Rantoul, you remember how hot it was that week. Well, Monday night was the same way. And I'd left my camper over to Glenville. It'd sat there all day in the hot sun, no electricity over. I'm not going over to Glenville. So I got a motel room in Grand Island that night and then started out on Tuesday morning to drop the tractor off. We dropped the tractor off at Rantoul. We backed it in the tent there that Case had, got that set up. I borrowed Scott Raish's Scout and drove around the grounds a little bit, had lunch there at Rantoul, and then headed on to Pennsylvania. I got there on Friday morning. Ben opened up the building. They got it's an old International Harvester prototype dealership building. If you ever get to Pennsylvania, you want to make sure and stop and visit. The Pennsylvania chapter owns that building. They have it set up as a museum. A lot of the original stuff in there. It's two-story. It's got a basement underneath it. So the showroom floor, it's a wood floor like you used to see in the old buildings. It creaks when you walk on it. And they've got refrigeration and stuff, refrigerators. They've got a cream separator. They've got several items on the showroom floor. The parts bins and stuff, just like they were when they were running it. It's a neat place. These reaper crates were down in the basement. When I saw them, I thought, oh my, I should have brought a bigger trailer. But we got everything loaded. We got everything strapped down. Ben and I went out and had a wonderful lunch there in Millville, Pennsylvania. Had a nice lunch, and then I started out and I got back about to the Ohio state line, spent the night there. Started out the next morning, and then just nicely down the road, and I see one of these straps on the back is working loose. I pulled off just as quick as I could and got it tightened back down again, and I fought that load the rest of the way back to Kansas. It just kept settling. I just could not keep it tight. I needed to readjust the whole load on top to get it where it wouldn't settle, and of course, by myself, there's no way I can move that heavy stuff. I just had to keep tightening the straps and letting it settle on its own. So, here's some more of my travels. This is over here on Highway 36 in Kansas, the geographical center of the continental United States. is right over there by Smith Center. They've got a marker on the highway. But if you're going by there, take time to detour and go over north a couple miles where the actual center is. There's a monument over there, and just a nice little quiet spot, a good break to get off the highway for a little bit and just be able to relax. Here we are back in Bird City. By this time it's around the last part of August, and we had the horse show, our draft horse and mule show that we do every year, scheduled for the first part of October. I had to do the Husker Harvest Days. I always do the antique tractor show there. They've given us a very large lot. And then I had another show in September. So I just kind of put everything on hold until I knew I'd be able to work on these reapers. I backed the trailer with just as loaded in the back of one of our buildings and just left it loaded for the time being. Then in the last part of, about the middle of October, okay, people ask me how I recovered from the Roundup. Well, I recovered in October. My friend and I took a trip. We went down through, we left home, we went down through Dodge City, we went down to Oklahoma City, we followed old Route 66 up through Springfield, Missouri, spent a couple days in Herman, Missouri, went up to Hannibal and spent a night out on the river on a riverboat dinner cruise, and then went up to the locks and then came back home across southern Iowa. I don't think we saw a single tractor. And so that was great. I got back home. It's always good to get back home. This is the farm where my grandmother grew up. This is the Edward Munger farm at Columbus, Pennsylvania. And in the background, you can see in the field shocked grain. In that country, in northwestern Pennsylvania, this was probably oats at that time is what that would have been. And this is the type of grain that the reapers were invented to harvest. You want me to go on? I could go on and on about that. I'll talk about that a little. I didn't talk much about that yesterday, but when Cyrus McCormick came up with an idea for mechanized harvest of small grains, the farmers were using a scythe or a cradle. The implement from antiquity to harvest small grain was a sickle. And what you could grasp with your hand and cut off in very small bunches would be very tedious, very slow operation to harvest the grain. Once they come up with the modern scythe, I'm guessing sometime in the 1700s, and then a little later on, I'm pretty sure it was an American invention, what we recognize as the cradle, that had a backstop on the side that would actually catch a big bunch of grain, and that enabled the men to harvest much more, but still he was very, very limited in the amount of grain that he could harvest, that one man could harvest. That was the bottleneck. You could go out with an apron full of grain and broadcast it on the tilled ground, and you could sow several acres a day, pretty easy, I think. But when it comes time to harvest the wheat, especially the varieties they had in those days, once the wheat gets ripe, then maybe you get a rain, and the next thing you know, the wheat is falling over, it's lying flat on the ground, the kernels shell out of the head, and they're lost. So you only had a very small window in the time that you could harvest that grain. If we would have not come up with mechanized agriculture, starting with that reaper, we would have never had an industrial revolution. we never would have been able to have all the other things that we enjoy today, because every one of us, almost every one of us, would still be out in the field grubbing out our own food. But the mechanized agriculture, starting with this reaper, made it possible for one farmer to make enough grain to feed many, many, many people. One of the first clues that I came to when I started looking into this 1847 reaper, Ben was convinced that it was an original reaper from back in the day. I emailed Tom Clark, who was a historian with Navistar, and Tom carried the idea that he thought it was an original. But I said, Tom, Chicago burned in 1871. If it's an original survivor, where was it? Why didn't it burn? I didn't really think it could be something from that early a date. I thought it had to be a replica from somewhere later. Well, when we opened up this crate, the little cast iron metal ferrules that held the lid on, they have International Harvester part numbers on them and the old IHC logo. So I knew right then that it definitely was a replica, that was something that was built at a later date. But I still didn't know at what date. So I was really curious to that. The very first inventions of the reaper, we'll kind of shift gears here and talk a little bit about the design of the reaper. The cutter bar on the reaper, which was a very critical feature that had to be worked out, the details that had to be worked out. Some of the earliest reapers had some rotary cutters that tended to cut the grain fairly well, but it strewed it around in such a disarray that there was no way you could pick up the grain and salvage it after it was cut. So that was not practical. Obed Hussey came up with a very acute angle cutter. He came up with the 3-inch spacing, which we use today, but his sections were a lot longer. They were very long and sharp, probably 4 or 5 inches long. They're described in the literature that we have. There's a picture of them. And they tended to chop the grain off instead of shearing it off. There was no cutting edge on the early guards at that time. They hadn't figured that out. The sickle that McCormick came up with was just a long, smooth blade. He didn't use the individual sections that Hussey used. And the very first inference we have to his blade, he calls it a straight, smooth blade. Then later he said he added serrations to the blade, and then as that didn't work very successfully, at some point he reversed these serrations about every 1.5 inches with the idea that it would cut both ways. Well, that wasn't very successful either. So in one testimony, he said that later he had coarser serrations, and I'm not exactly sure what that looked like either. Here's a picture. This center item here, that's McCormick's straight sickle of 1831, and I believe the very first one that he demonstrated at Steele's Tavern there was probably just a smooth blade. And how well it worked, I don't know. If you read McCormick's testimonies when he was trying to get his reaper patents extended in the 1850s, he testified in court that those very first reapers, until his improvements of 1845, they were not very successful. He was not able to sell very many machines. This sickle here, this is an actual picture of the 1831 reaper that we have. You can see it looks very much like saw teeth. Now bear in mind, this is a replica. This is what the engineers in 1931 thought that they should make this machine to look like. They had no drawings, they had no parts, they didn't even have the memories of the old men, because anybody that was alive in 1831 that had ever seen one of these original reapers was gone. So they had to make their best guess at what this should really look like. This is probably a fairly accurate rendition of some of the later improvements. The very first improvement of 1845 calls for a scalloped sickle. Okay, now from the Reaper Source Manual, which was put out by International Harvester for the 1931 centennial, they state that the sickle with a row of obtuse angular plates with alternate serrations was added in 1851. So somehow this kind of, from a scallop sickle to the individual plates riveted onto a bar, this was all kind of in flux all through that area. And being that the records, any records that would have been kept would have been destroyed in the Chicago fire, and so all you have is memories of some of the old timers, and most of them being gone by that time. A lot of it's guesswork, and a lot of the testimony that we have is a little bit conflicting. We did several. International Harvester, the McCormick Company, even before them, have a long history of creating replicas of these machines. This machine here is a highly enameled, greatly just finely finished piece of craftsmanship that was not built as a working model, but it was built as a display model that was shown at the London Exposition in 1851. When I looked at this glossy photo under a magnifying glass up at Madison at the archives, this does show the sawtooth sickle, it appears to be. And I could see when I looked at it with the magnifying glass, the McCormick name, McCormick Harvesting Company, is stenciled on the platform floor. And it shines, it's beautiful. It's got several coats of enamel on it. It was really a showman machine. This machine here, I believe, is also a replica. It is not the machine that we have. The gearing is a little different on this machine, but this is a replica of an 1847 model. Shows the real post coming forward from the rear of the machine over on the outboard side. This is actually a still photo from the film, The Romance of the Reaper, which was put out in, I think, 1932. This picture here is an 1851 model that the caption on it said that it had cut 24 crops. And if you examine it closely, you can see some of the boards are split and cracked. It's been in the field, it's been used, it's well worn. I don't know, from the picture, it appears to be probably a factory scene. I'm guessing that either McCormick Harvesting Machine, or it may have been later, it may have been after International Harvester was formed, that this machine was probably purchased back from a farmer for the historical significance of it and preserved by the company. You can see it's got paper labels pasted to it on the different parts for reference. For what purpose, we don't know. But here is a picture. This picture here, let me get this right. This is, I believe, the same machine, because you can see those paper labels on this machine. And if you look close enough there, can you see it on that picture? Yeah. This picture was taken at the Kansas Wheat Exposition, which was held in Wichita. The picture was captioned circa 1922. Well, when I looked it up online, the Kansas Wheat Exposition was held from 1921 to 1923 at the Meriden Speedway. Now, we've got a little Kansas history here, and this exhibit, this International Harvester exhibit, which would have been state-of-the-art, they're focusing on the history and also the state-of-the-art at that time in 1922. Here's an 816 tractor hooked to a binder, which I believe would have been a PTO binder. International Harvester pioneered the power takeoff with the 1816 tractor. And I have never seen an 816 with a power takeoff on it. And I've sure never seen the binder that goes with it. But the only way to order a power takeoff on an 816, you had to order it with the binder. It was a package that came with the binder. So you had a power takeoff binder. The binder was entirely different than the tractor-drawn PTO binders that we see later. They were direct, hard mounted to the tractor without a swivel tongue. They were direct, mounted directly, and then on the back of the binder it had caster wheels on it. So when you went around the corner, the whole binder would swing out and turn. And I would dearly love to find one someday, but they were only made for that one specific tractor, and I don't know, I'm sure they were made in low numbers, and if any of them has survived, I have not run across it yet. Here's another machine. This machine was shipped to Denmark in 1849. And these men are demonstrating it here. We've got the raker setting on the machine. This is all part of these later patents. In 1847, McCormick added this seat on the back so the raker could ride along on the machine. The previous machines, the raker had to actually walk or half run to keep up with the machine to rake the material off. This machine also includes a seat for the driver. The previous ones, the driver would have probably either walked alongside or rode one of the horses, where with this he can actually ride on the machine. Part of the patent was in the very first 1845 patents, McCormick had to move the gearing forward to counterbalance the weight of the man on the back of the machine so it didn't tip over backwards. Well, apparently, from all I can figure out, once they added the driver's seat to the machine, then that counterbalanced the weight, and it appears that he moved the gearing back to the original design, which was a lot simpler because the improved gearing, with the gearing moved forward, he had to bring the power ahead of the wheel and then use another jack shaft and bring the power back, bring the pitman arm back and make another joint to get the pitman back to the sickle bar. So it would have been a lot more complicated, and I could see where with lost motion in the pitman stick could be very problematic. And this is a real simple gearing arrangement that is on this model here. This gearing is the exact same gearing that we have on our machine at Bird City. When I started putting the machine together, I have it laid out on the floor here. The wood parts are all varnished. This machine was obviously made for display. It was made to look nice. There's no stenciling, no name, no numbers, or anything like that on the machine. But all the parts, the wood parts, are varnished. The metal parts, including the platform floor, are painted in a light gray color. And there's very little wear on the sickle itself. The guards underneath where they're painted, the paint isn't wore off. I did find a very little bit of crop residue around the wheel that's on the outboard side of the platform. So the machine apparently has been in the field and has at least cut some grain. Tom Clark and Lee Grady, Lee's the archivist up to the Wisconsin Historical Society, removed the parts from this crate and they inspected them in 2012. And I got the metal parts were in this crate. I carefully took them out, laid them out for assembly. Here's Tom's screenshot that he did. I think this again shows that same, this very well could be that same reaper that we looked at before. This one appears to have been in the field and been used. At the parts laid out, this wheel, this is the main bull wheel that drives the machine. This had a couple broken spokes in it. It had been welded before, and I did not attempt to do any repair on this. My goal was to keep everything as original as I could, just to preserve it for future generations that they could see just exactly what we have today and not make any improvements to it. I washed the wood with Murphy's oil soap. It's a beautiful piece of machinery. The gear sets that you see laying here on the floor, these two gears both belong to 1831 reapers. When I started putting this together, of course, one of these was in the crate. This other gear set here with a pitman, it was in the crate. But when I started trying to figure out how it all went together, of course, I had no diagrams, no instructions, no nothing. I'd never even seen one of these machines before. But I couldn't figure out exactly how these gears were going to work because didn't seem to be right. Well, finally one day after thinking about it, I went out and looked in one of the 1831 crates, and there was a gear set, one of these bevel gear sets that was slightly different, and I said, aha, that's the one I need. So then we were able to proceed and get it together. So I think we were very fortunate that after all these years that we still had all the pieces, because this stuff wasn't all neatly in crates. A lot of the pieces were just kind of loose laying on top of that one load that I had. So here it's starting to look a little more like a reaper. You can see this distinguishing reel post coming forward from the back, braced up from the back. This is the divider board that I showed you the close-up picture of. Here's the finished reaper sitting in our museum down there. At this point, I really wanted to do some more research. I was really getting curious about this machine after having worked on it for a week or so. And this was in November by this time. We'd had some really nice days. The weather was dry. I looked at the forecast. They were forecasting good weather. I decided that it was time to go to Madison. And I had decided by this time, I'd pretty well convinced myself that this machine was from the 1847 reaper patents. So I started focusing in that direction, and I did a web search for 1847 McCormick reaper, and one of the first pictures that came up was this page from an October 1947 Harvester World, which was the machine that the dealers all got. And there was an article in there that talked about the 100 years in Chicago celebration that International Harvester had put on that year. And I thought, oh, there's an 1847 Reaper. Do you suppose they had one of those on display at the 100 Years in Chicago exhibition? I mean, that would make sense. This is the first machine that was produced in Chicago in 1847, 100 years on. Yes, we're going to feature this. So I decided to go to Madison. It was nice weather. I got the oil changed in the old Buick, and we're going to go kind of incognito, and we went to Madison. They've got a beautiful facility up there. It's right downtown by the university. The historical building, I mean, it's like a state capitol. It's a beautiful building. This picture here is taken from the upper hallway, looking down into the second floor library reading room. This picture was taken first thing in the morning, but later in the day, that room would be full of college students in there studying and reading. I met Sally and Lee up there, and we started digging out boxes. And one of the first boxes I looked through that was stuff that was in conjunction with the 1947 event there at the 100 Years in Chicago. Here is this glossy photograph. And yeah, that's what I said. I said, look what I found, look what I found. Yeah, 1847, and there it is. And this is a display. They had their historical display at the 1947 event was in a tent. And that's what this depicts. The show itself, this is an expense record. I was really hoping that if they build a replica for that show, I'd find some record of it. But all the records I found, these records here, expenses out to all the different places, and in the memorandum it says charges in connection with the exhibit. Well, that doesn't tell me that's not very conclusive. So that's the kind of stuff I was finding. You know, there's evidence. I found of course, all the expense records are there, and I looked through a lot of it, and it's kind of exciting. It's kind of a neat piece of history. The International Harvester Company rented Soldier Field from the Chicago City Parks Department for $17,000, and the original budget for the event, they'd budgeted about $250,000. The total amount when they got all said and done was almost $500,000, and they served almost 500,000 people. They put on special trains. Dealers brought their customers. It was a huge event. It ran for 10 days in late October of 1947. And the earliest documents that I could find where they even got together and started planning this event was dated in August. How in the world they put that thing together, you know, in less than 90 days? I don't know, but they, you know, in those days they just, well, with a big company like that, it's all interdone within the company, and it ain't no red tape. We just do it, and they did it. So this here is a list of inventory that they had machines, replicas on hand sometime in the 1950s. Listed right here on the top, the first one, model of 1847 hand rake reaper. And they made a lot of models that were just a couple feet long, and then right underneath it, it says full-size replica of the same. Is that our replica? Is that another one? We don't know. But they definitely had one stored in a warehouse in 1950. Here's another neat thing I ran across in looking through the 100 Years in Chicago display. there was an item in their index that said they had a photo album. Okay, bring me that to look at. So she brought it out. I opened it up. About the second page, there's another view. Same machine. (1847). This machine shows all the exact same details that our machine shows. This machine does not appear to be varnished. You can still see the wood grain. Whether it is the same machine and was varnished at a later date, in the time that they put this together, very well could be. Maybe they ran out of time, didn't have time to get it varnished for the show. We don't know. Probably never will know. Sally was very good to scan this for me out of the album. I just got this scan a couple days ago in the email, so we want to extend an appreciation to the archives for being so helpful. I know when I first started working, when I got up there, we can't do the research for you. Well, no, they can't, but Sally had already looked through a bunch of stuff and suggested boxes I should look through. Lee Grady looked up a bunch more and suggested I look through. So, yeah, they're very, very helpful. On about the third day I was looking through stuff, I ran across this photograph. And this got me even more excited because this machine really does appear to be varnished. The only trouble is this picture didn't have any date on it. No caption, no nothing. But somewhere at some event, and you can see the people are dressed in costume. They got the long dresses, they got the top hats. Don't know where this might have been taken, but there's a couple tanks here close by in the background. But the whole horizon, there's nothing. There's no tall buildings, there's no trees. I'm guessing this is probably down on the lake shore near Chicago. But, it's kind of like doing detective work. You eliminate what it can't be and then say, well, what could it be? So I would really like to find more pictures and more evidence of what this really is, because especially where they've got it hooked to horses, have been out parading it, they may have taken it to the field and cut a little grain with it. You would have thought a promotional item like this, I was hoping there would be more photographic evidence. Because in a promotion, you surely want to take lots of pictures. Especially by 1947, cameras were very much in use, and they would have wanted to get it documented. But where those pictures went, if they're still in existence, I didn't find them. So I went down, the last day I was there, I went down to the Capitol. If you're ever in Madison, stop up to the Capitol too. You can still go up into the Capitol Dome. There's a walkway outside, clear around the dome. It's a beautiful Capitol building, really nice place. Nice view of the lakes there in Madison. When I got back home then, of course, it was time to put the 1831 Reaper replica together. By this time, I had instructions. I'd found the instruction manual with the Reaper source stuff. It was a very poor copy. The pages had been taped together. I thought, well, I'll surely find a better copy before I get done looking, but I never did. But anyway, I scanned that one. So I had all the instructions that they mailed out. I assumed they would have had one of these books with every Reaper originally, but where they all went, nobody knows. And here's the assembled 1831 Reaper. I had to make the real arms. I had to make one post. Otherwise, this is all the original wood from 1931. I tried to preserve as much as I could, use the original bolts. They went to great lengths in 1931 to make this look as authentic as they could. They took the bolts and hammered the heads so they looked like blacksmith-made bolts. The nails in the platform, they used the old square nails, cut nails. So it's a very authentic construction. They did the best they could with what they had to work with. Yeah. Another picture of it with the 1847 model in the background there. There they are again. We decided that the 1831 Reaper would display so much nicer with a horse in front of it. So one day I approached Rod and I said, Rod, I says, I'd really like to have a horse with that Reaper. Could I buy a horse? And he said, well, the money's in the building fund. Why don't you just buy a horse? So that's what we did. We bought a horse. So he don't eat no hay. He don't make no mess. He don't even winter when you come in. It was very historic. International Harvester has always made a very big deal of the invention of the Reaper, and very much so. It's probably the most important implement that we have in the history of, not only in the history of mechanized agriculture, but in the history of mechanized society. This is a 1899 binder, which would have been pretty much the climax of the development of the harvesting equipment. By this time, in this short span of time between 1831 and 1899, we have improved this machine to where it not only cuts the grain and does a very good job, it elevates it up to a twine, a fully automated twine knotter that binds the bundle, kicks it out on the ground, and works just like clockwork. It'll go out there and make bundles all day long, never miss a tie. And that was a very advanced machine. At that time, the harvesting companies were building all very similar machines. It was very intense competition. They were undercutting each other on price. It had got to the point where it was very, very hard for these companies to make any profit on producing these machines. McCormick was very well poised in the business. He was one of the top contenders. Charles Deering was right behind him. These two men got together and they talked it over. It took several years in the making, but they decided that they need to consolidate. So in 1902, 5 of these harvester companies came together to form the International Harvester Company. These 5 were the McCormick Harvester Company, Deering Harvester Company, Plano Manufacturing, Milwaukee Harvester, and Champion, what was owned by the Wardner Bushnell and Glester Company. And I'm very pleased that we have these early reapers on display, and I hope that many of you can come out to Bird City and visit. I'd really enjoy talking with any of you more about this, and I want to thank you for attending. I want to thank you for being a part of the International Harvester Collectors and its continued efforts to conserve and protect these implements that we all cherish and love so dearly. Thank you.